Alright, for this video, I'm going to be talking about how I deal with overthinking. Before I get too far into the video, I would like to read a definition for the word overthinking that I found and decided to write down in my notes. This definition says, overthinking is when you repetitively dwell on the same thought or situation over and over to the point that it disrupts your life. Based off of that definition, I can honestly say that I've been doing a lot of overthinking recently because I've been repetitively dwelling on the same thoughts and situations over and over, and it has been disrupting my life. As a result of that, I felt like I'm stuck, specifically stuck in a loop, and I've been trying to figure out how to get unstuck from that loop. But it's been very difficult because I've been very tired and have been experiencing a lot of stress recently. And what allowed this stuff to happen is because I've been overwhelmed by too much stress and too much information that my mind was unable to process, and as a result of the sensory overload that led to overthinking, I've had a lot of trouble with decision making recently. And as a result of that trouble with making decisions, I felt stuck and unable to fix my problems, and so that's resulted in me being more tired and feeling more overwhelmed. It's been causing me more stress, and it's been leading to more overthinking. I've been experiencing, or more like I've been having a lot more nervous thoughts recently. I'm not sure if that's a good way to express that, but I know my paranoia has gotten worse recently, and I also know that I've been having a lot of racing thoughts recently, and I've been worrying a lot about a lot of things recently. A lot of that worrying has been a result of my recent financial stresses, and I found it difficult to make decisions that I could be confident in, because with my mind not being in a condition that I'd like it to be in, I've had a lot of trouble with dealing with my fears, and so that has been a major confidence killer. And I've been trying to figure out how I'm going to deal with these issues. And so I did a lot of thinking about, I've done a lot of thinking here recently about ways I have tried to help myself with decision making in the past, and so I wrote down in my notes a lot of different things that helped me out with decision making in the past that I thought would potentially be helpful to anybody watching this video, and I apologize for having long pauses. I don't know how not to have the long pauses in my videos. When I'm tired, when I'm under a lot of stress, when I'm trying to be careful with my words, and when I'm trying to choose my words carefully so that I can try to make more sense with what I'm saying, it becomes difficult for me to speak at a fast pace. But I'm trying to get better with that. Anyways, back to the main topic of this video. I have made a list in my notes about different strategies that have helped me with decision making. But before I get into that, I'd like to talk about two different categories of overthinking. One is dwelling on the past. I've been doing a lot of dwelling on the past recently. That's involved me thinking a lot about feelings of guilt over decisions I made in the past. I've also dwelled a lot on the what ifs, as far as what if this had happened instead? What if I had done this instead? How would things be different now? And the second category of overthinking is worrying about the future. I've been doing a lot of worrying about the future recently because I've been afraid about my own financial state. I've been worried about the state of the world in general, and I've been worried about what's going to happen to me in my life, and I've been worried about my future. I've been worried about how I'm going to be able to reach my goals. But anyways, back to the list about different strategies I've come up with to help me with decision making. The ordering that I have these in isn't necessarily the best ordering. I just wrote them down as I thought of them, and I didn't take the time to put them in a different order, so I'm just going to read them in the order that I wrote them down. First one says, take breaks, but schedule a time to come back to trying to make whatever decision you're trying to make. I find it helpful sometimes when I'm overwhelmed by racing thoughts to take a break from whatever it is that I'm trying to figure out. And by taking a break, I mean it could be something such as talking to a person about it. It could be going for a walk. It could be getting rest in some way. It could be getting food or getting refreshments. But sometimes when our minds get overwhelmed, sometimes we need to give our mind sometimes we need to give our minds a break, because if we try to stick with a thought process from start to finish, sometimes we get stuck. And if we get stuck and we try to force ourselves to continue forward without breaks, that can make it take longer for us to figure out what we're trying to figure out, because we end up frustrating ourselves by being impatient, and we end up wasting too much energy, and that makes it harder to figure out whatever we're trying to figure out. The second thing I have on the list says seek advice from a non-biased source. Sometimes I find it helpful to look things up on the internet to try and help me with making certain decisions. Sometimes I find it helpful to ask questions, or just in general have a conversation with someone that I trust about issues that I have. And I prefer to have a non-biased source to help me with decision making, because sometimes emotions can get in the way of making a reasonable decision. And so sometimes when you have another person who may not be emotionally affected by whatever you're telling them about, they may be able to notice things and understand things that you may not be able to at that point in time, and they may be able to point those things out to you and help you make a decision based off of what they're able to understand and notice that you may not be able to at that point in time. Also, having a person help you with decision making can help lighten the load. But I find it to be important to try not to fully pass on my problems to other people. I believe that if I seek out help from another person with decision making, I believe that I should not pass on the full weight of the issue to them. I feel like I should try my best to do my part to cooperate with solving whatever problem I'm trying to solve. The third thing on the list says break the problem down into steps. I like to make problems not seem so big and scary by breaking them down into smaller steps. I like to organize things into steps so that it seems like it's easier to deal with and easier to process. Sometimes our minds can become overwhelmed by things being unorganized and by things being all over the place, and sometimes we need to break things down into smaller steps so that we have less fear about dealing with those tasks, because sometimes if we don't break it down, it can seem big and scary and it may seem like too much to deal with, but if we break it down into smaller steps, it can actually be easier to deal with, because we can allow our mind to take the time to organize things and make peace with certain things rather than trying to rush things and make a hasty decision. And if we take more time when we can to break our problems down into smaller pieces and try to organize our thoughts properly about things, if we take that extra time when we can, then we will be more likely to make reasonable decisions, because we will pretty much give our minds more chances to be able to notice certain details that we might not have been able to notice if we were too hasty in our decision making and if we were jumping to conclusions. The fourth thing I have written down in this list says, weigh pros and cons. Yeah, that is the fourth thing. I was just making sure because I keep having to count. I probably should have numbered the list, but I didn't think of that beforehand. Anyways, it says, weigh pros and cons. When making decisions, you have to look at the negatives and the positives. You gotta look at what can go wrong, but also what can go right. You don't want to focus too much on one over the other. If you focus too much on the negative, that can lead to you making certain decisions out of fear, and that can make you feel helpless and even stuck. And if you think too much about the positives and not enough about the negatives, then you can end up being overconfident and overly hopeful. You need to think enough about both the positives and the negatives. The next thing on the list says, eliminate unnecessary factors from consideration. Sometimes there can be a lot of things that are unnecessary as far as which details are included in a problem. And when there are too many details that may not even be necessary to use to go about solving a problem, when there are too many details, you can be overwhelmed by so many details, and that can make it difficult to notice things that you need to notice in order to solve your problems. And so by eliminating unnecessary details from consideration, you can figure out what things you need to use to go about solving a problem and what things you don't need to use when trying to solve a problem. When our minds get overwhelmed by too many details, it becomes difficult to... When our minds get overwhelmed by too many details, it can become difficult to figure out which things are important to us. And figuring out what's important to us is a major... It's a major step with problem solving. Another thing on my list is remove distractions. Now, that remove distractions part of the list is very similar to the last thing before that on the list. Unnecessary details can be distracting, and that can make it hard to be able to focus on the important things. So, when you eliminate those distractions, you can focus on the things that are important to you. And the next thing on the list is organize priorities. Sometimes we have priorities that we end up pushing aside because our mind becomes overwhelmed by too many details and our judgment ends up being clouded by brain fog, and so we end up losing our sense of what things are important to us. And when we lose our sense of what things are important to us, we end up forgetting our priorities. And so sometimes we need to figure out what our priorities are and which problems we need to solve in which order. And sometimes, because of being too afraid to take on certain problems, our minds will avoid those problems by pushing them aside. And sometimes, instead of procrastinating and jumping from task to task, sometimes we need to stop and think about which things are bothering us the most and what we can do about them. The last thing I have on the list is mindfulness. By mindfulness, I mean allowing yourself to notice certain things, allowing yourself to pay attention to certain things, and allowing yourself to be aware of what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you like, what you don't like. And that can be in the form of meditation, that can be in the form of having a conversation with somebody, telling them about your day or whatever. It could be in the form of keeping a journal. However you want to organize your thoughts. However you decide to organize your thoughts, it's very important to organize your thoughts. Sometimes our dreams can send us messages about our needs. Sometimes our dreams can help us figure out which things are bothering us and which problems are more immediate that we need to solve. Sometimes random intrusive thoughts that we can have can let us know what's bothering us. Sometimes it's hard to tell which things are important for us to pay attention to and which things are just distractions. But either way, we need to figure out which things are most important to us and which problems are the most serious ones. And I hope that this video wasn't too long. I hope that I didn't have too many long pauses. I hope that my voice wasn't too boring. I hope that nobody fell asleep watching this video. I hope that any information that I provided might potentially be useful to someone watching the video. And if not, hopefully making this video will help me feel better. I've had a lot of stress recently, and I'm hoping that I can finally make peace with the things that have been on my mind lately. So, that's it for this video. Peace!